I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and help remind everybody exactly what the premise of giving is all about. It is not about one day, it's not about 2 or 3 days. The premise of giving is every day of our lives. Truly, there is a higher purpose to this life, and I can't think of any higher purpose than to try to make the lives of other human beings as prosperous and as peaceful as possible. I understand the dark side. I understand the light side. I've been to both places. I've seen the bottom of both places and the top of both places. But ultimately, I think as a society, as a advanced society, we need to find some level of balance in what we do. And I'm not saying complete balance. I'm not saying some utopic balanced place of oneness is the purity answer of all things. What I'm saying is that some level of balance in our minds, in our hearts, in our bodies, in our souls will ultimately lead to a stabilization of the system. And you always need an oscillation. You need something to, like I use as an analogy. It's like a boat. Society is like a boat, and it needs to sit on the water and on some level of buoyancy and balance. So, a boat is balanced. That's why it's able to sit on the water, but it does no good if it doesn't move. It just sits there, and if there's no wind, there's nothing. It will just sit there. So I always like to think of the 25 to 35%, the 60 to 65% and 35 to 40% oscillation between good and bad as being the motor. This oscillation will be like the motor to the balanced boat on the water, and it will keep it moving. So, but I think where we're at now, we have maybe 15% balance, and 85% negativity, pretty much. Well, there's some good in there, but, I'm not trying to be all negative, but I just think that the system and what I was thinking was the golden ratio, which was 65% balanced and 35% oscillation between good and bad. You always need some level of instability to keep churning, the soup bowl, keep things stirred up, keep things mixed up just enough so that there's some incentive to continue on in some level of division. And let me get to the point about that division. I'm not talking about you against me or me against you, but actually it gets a little deeper than that. It's actually keeping the division of the human being from being absorbed into a whole of the universe. Because if we're all balanced and everything in the universe becomes balanced, pretty much everything would have no need to be separate. There would be, I would not be me, you would not be you. We would be one. Because eventually, if you balance out everything, eventually as things spawn, they would have no need to be spawned. They would just kind of meld together into a soupy mix of grayness. And although that sounds tempting and although that sounds great, I tend to want to think a little deeper than that and think that, you don't want to really rob the future or the experience of being divided on some level separate from one another. What's next? We read each other's minds. What's next after that? We come together. What's next after that? Then we start melding together. And what's next after that? Just one solid state of grayness, of one consciousness. And maybe that's what the universe is headed for, to become the one, become a massive entity of one consciousness overall, and that's God. And maybe that's what we're headed for. But I tend to want to extend the division long enough that the future future energy forms can experience this kind of division and learn the lessons that we're learning. Because ultimately, it's a beautiful journey to go from being born into the dark, which we pretty much are, and then, the journey of growth and experience and suffering and enlightenment and this whole journey of greatness that a life brings. When that ends, you get complacent in a state of oneness. It's like you don't experience the bad and the good. You just experience a solid state of oneness, of balance. And I think that's kind of robbing the whole beautiful experience of life. And that's kind of why I believe that there is an overall creature, that a consciousness of the mass that is God, whether you want to call him Allah, you want to call him, anything, whatever you want to call God, Bible's God, or the God Ganesh or Shiva, whatever you want to call him. There is an overall consciousness of all things. There is a point where all things begin and all things end. And I think that point, that consciousness, ultimately, on many levels of comprehension, created this division for a reason. And I think, we're in a rush to, this utopic idea of coming together as oneness and peace and love and harmony. But that never works. That never works. It's proven that we go through the light ages every, 27,000 years, and we all get utopic and peaceful and loving, and then all of a sudden we start getting to the outer reaches of the galaxy, and then we start getting dark again because we're more in the dark energy rather than coming closer to the core and of the galaxy, and then we experience all this hatred, and so we just pour out of the utopia, and it breaks down, and then we just get all mad and crazy again. We have these ups and downs, these waves, which is the frequency of all creation. Matter is condensed frequencies, that hum and vibrate. So I kind of put my mind to the works and took all that information and said, hey, why don't we try to at least balance, 60, 65? And that's a high aspiration. That's a high goal, and that's hard to fathom, but I think we can do it. I don't see why anything's possible. Anything's, especially with algorithms, you could, on so many levels, stop feeding off each other. Stop trying to sell the cheapest shit for the most gain. And on many levels, try to balance that out, that structure of monetary gain. Balance it out to the point where it's 60, 65% balanced, and 35 to 40% oscillation between super good and super bad. That spectrum in there, the whole spectrum. You don't have to go super bad, super good, but somewhere in that spectrum, find some level of oscillation where we swing, keeping the boat going on the lake. And ultimately, I think it's important that we start thinking on this level and even higher levels of consciousness. And I think it all begins with, being aware of your fellow man, being aware of your fellow sister, and trying to share throughout the year. There's a lot of homeless out there. There's a lot of drug addicts. There's a lot of sad and depressed people. You know, even the rich are sad and depressed. A lot of them. You know, money doesn't buy happiness. Fame doesn't buy happiness. Wealth doesn't buy happiness. As a matter of fact, most of the time it goes the opposite way, unless you give the majority of it away back to where it came from. And that's the one of the higher purposes of give and take and giving. Let's remember that this season, this holiday season on Christmas, what the true meaning of the holiday is. There's a higher purpose. Merry Christmas. God bless.